Hey guys, Spudknocker here, as always, and we are back in the beautiful F-14A Tomcat with the awesome VF-111 paint scheme. You guys know it is always my favorite. And today I want to talk about a very interesting topic that will probably end up being a bit controversial in what I think would be awesome for a new addition to DCS World. And I wanted to see what you guys would think about something like this, because I have noticed that there is a fatal flaw in DCS World multiplayer when it comes to dogfighting specifically and multiplayer combat in general. It also, of course, affects single player, but with the AI, I think it affects it to a lesser degree. And that is the absence of the physicality of a dogfight, or the physicality of maneuvering your aircraft and making aerobatic maneuvers. Flying aerobatics in a jet like the F-14, or in an F-18, or a Kristen Eagle, or a Pit Special, whatever your chosen aircraft for flying aerobatics is a physically demanding and punishing thing you can do for yourself. It's not comfortable, it's not easy, it's exhausting. I flew aerobatics with one of my friends who is a semi-professional surfer, and after our flight, just doing an hour's worth of aerobatic sets, he's told me that was the most exhausted he's ever been in his entire life, and it was unlike anything he's ever felt before. And then on top of it, you have combat, which is, of course, aerobatics applied to a real situation, right? Aerobatics in and of itself is like nothing, right? But air combat is aerobatics applied. So in DCS World multiplayer, especially when you get 1v1 type situations, you get a lot of dogfights that are fought to an absolute standstill, where they just go crashing down to the sea or crashing down to the floor of the desert, where nobody can really get an advantage on the other, simply because the physical nature of dogfighting doesn't take part in DCS World. You have two evenly matched F-18 pilots in DCS, and they fly against each other, and the two F-18s they fly are absolutely identical. There's no system failures, there's no issues there, and the pilots don't get exhausted by the pulling of the G's, the getting smashed in their seat, squeezing their torso, squeezing their leg muscles to try and keep some of that blood up into their upper body and in their brain to avoid blacking out. And so this part of dogfighting is something that just doesn't play into DCS World at all whatsoever. And I was thinking about how could we potentially implement a physical part of dogfighting and pulling G's and flying aerobatics in DCS World that will make it so pilots have to at least expend some of their brain cells and some of their energy in DCS World to fighting those G's. When I've flown in fun little dogfights against friends in real life, in real aerobatic planes, a lot of the time doesn't necessarily come down to who flies the aircraft absolutely perfectly, in terms of that was a perfectly textbook Immelman, or that was a perfectly textbook Split S, or they're perfectly turning right at turning speed for that aircraft. Those things are, of course, extremely important, but a lot of times it comes down to who can handle the G's the best, who can handle the physical forces on their body the best, and then whoever can't handle it is usually the loser, and whoever can handle it is usually the winner. I've noticed of myself and my body, and it's true of every pilot, some people to more degree and some people to a lesser degree, that my G tolerance goes up and it goes down on a day-to-day basis. And there are so many variables and factors that can affect an individual's G tolerance. Of course, have you experienced G's before? Is it something that you usually partake in, pulling G's, and is it something that you do every day? If yes, then your G tolerance is naturally going to get better and better and better as you do it more and more and more. Other factors include, are you sick? You know, maybe you've got a little bit of a cold, and so your body is not as able to handle those G's nearly as well as when you're totally full up and ready to go and totally healthy. And this, of course, plays a major part in air-to-air combat. Like, think about this. One side is losing a war. Their pilots, they're starving. They're not getting enough food because of aerial bombardment of, say, Axis cities during World War II and food stocks becoming deplenished, things like that. Those pilots are not going to be able to handle those G's physically nearly as well as a pilot who is healthy, getting all of the correct nutrition they need, is totally hydrated, all these kinds of things that, say, an Allied pilot back in World War II would have a much easier time with that. And of course, it was the opposite at the beginning of the war. Think about Japanese pilots in the Southwest Pacific around New Guinea, from the giant airbase of Rabaul, against P-40 pilots who are totally outmatched and starving in their own right at Port Moresby in New Guinea. For me personally, food is a major aspect of my ability to handle G tolerance and, of course, not make myself sick when I'm flying in an aerobatic regime. And so, personally, I have to make sure that I eat quite a bit before I fly aerobatics, which seems counterintuitive. Most people are like, oh, well, you shouldn't eat before you fly aerobatics, then you won't get sick. I find that it's the opposite. If I don't eat, I tend to get sick, and my G tolerance goes way down into the bucket. And so one of the things that I was thinking about, I've talked to this with a couple different people, how do we implement the idea of having to fight those G's in DCS World? And as I said earlier in the video, this is going to be something that some DCS World pilots are going to be like, hell no, no way, don't add that. But other people are going to jump at it. And I'm one of the people who think it could be a very, very cool idea. And for me, I kind of thought of a couple different ways something like this could be implemented. And I kind of actually got these ideas and took them from first-person shooter games in a lot of ways. So, and I've talked to some people who are real-life aerobatic pilots, some former military pilots. They don't necessarily play DCS, but they know of DCS. They've watched my videos, things of that nature, as well as I've talked to some hardcore DCS World pilots. And everyone agrees that it would be a really good idea to implement something of this nature. So as we're pulling G's here, bring this guy around. The idea would be to have kind of a mini game or like a meta game when it comes to actually fighting those G's in DCS World. And I do know that the physical nature of dogfighting definitely comes into play for people who have VR headsets, because they have to look all the way around behind them to actually see stuff that are actually behind them. Unlike it's one-to-one, rather than the accelerated viewing of like Track IR like I'm using now. I personally use Track IR because I can make videos for you guys that look a heck of a lot better with Track IR than I can with any other type of VR headset kind of situation. But anyway, oh, there goes a compressor stall. Take care of that situation real quick. There we go. All right, so like I said, it'd be kind of a mini game, so to speak. So that mini game would entail something like an active reload. You guys have seen those in FPS games before, where, you know, you got your rifle, you're shooting at the bad guys, and uh-oh, your magazine is run dry. Time to reload your magazine. So you hit the reload button, you know, usually X on, say, an Xbox controller or something like that, and then there's a little, like, almost like a little bar, a little timing bar that pops up that says, oh, if you hit the X button, the reload button again, right at the correct time, you can then reload a lot faster. You know, your hands are in sync, your hand-eye coordination is good to go, and you just get that magazine into the mag well of your rifle a lot faster, and your reload is complete a lot quicker. And so something like that could be kind of cool for G tolerance in DCS World, whereas a couple different ways this could be implemented. You could even have a timing bar that's down there on, say, that pops up on the bottom of your screen or something of that nature, that says if you press your G tolerance button, which would be a new keybind, your G tolerance will be increased if you press it at this correct time as you're pulling those Gs. So pressing that G tolerance button to help keep yourself from blacking out. If you don't press it or you're mistimed, the amount of time it takes for you that's off of that perfect timing decreases your G tolerance more. So the closer you are to that correct time, the more your G tolerance is increased. If you're right on, your G tolerance is great. If you are off, your G tolerance, not so great. And so that would be something that happens every time you start to pull a lot of Gs. Let's say you get over 3 Gs sustained in DCS or something of that nature. Some kind of number where that little mini game then starts to come into play. That would be one method of doing it. One way you could do it, of course, is just have a G tolerance button that, say, if you start to pull Gs, you have to start mashing that G tolerance button down as many times as you can, and as many times as you push it down, as you're pulling those Gs, your pilot is bearing down. Your pilot, he or she, is squeezing his or her legs, their torso, all that kind of stuff, and they are able to maintain a much higher G tolerance. Or it could be a timing device instead of a little like timing bar that pops up, kind of like in those FPS games with those active reloads. It would be the same kind of idea of tunnel vision that we see in DCS World. I haven't been able to get it to come up, and I'm kind of wary of it because I don't want to break my wings off in the middle of a video in my F-14 here. But as that tunnel vision starts to come in, you will see, your vision get scrunched tighter and tighter and tighter into the center of your screen. And as you start to press that button, that G tolerance button, over and over and over again, or at the correct timing, that tunnel vision starts to come back out, and your G tolerance is increased. And so it adds a bit of skill and a bit of mental. We have to concentrate on this. Something that we have to keep in our mind and devote brain cells to as we're dogfighting in DCS World, to ensure that we don't black out and that we can get an advantage physically over the bad guy jet that you're fighting. So that way we don't have these just simple dogfights where two pretty evenly matched players in DCS just end up fighting it all the way down to the desert floor or to the waves below, because they're flying the same aircraft as DCS, so every aircraft is always perfect. There's no issues with the aircraft, and so they can't get necessarily a great advantage on the other. Now, I know that there's many people who are much better at dogfighting than myself in DCS World, and much better at BVR combat than myself in DCS, and that's totally fine. However, I still think this is a valid idea for those who are still incredibly good and can beat anyone all the time in DCS, because the best pilot can have a bad day physically and not be able to take as many Gs without blacking out as, say, the worst pilot who is ready to go firing on all cylinders that day physically, So it adds a whole new element to flying in DCS World that is very much missing. It would affect all of DCS World air combat, not just the simple dogfights, but it would affect BVR combat, how pilots are able to evade missiles that are fired at them, whether they're air-to-air missiles, whether they're SAMs, whether it's AAA coming up at them. It would make pilots fly a lot more conservatively and thus a lot more realistically, because they have to devote brain cells to that timing mechanism or that mashing of that button at the correct times to keep themselves oriented physically in the cockpit and having to react to the onset of Gs. Now, even the best pilot who is feeling the best, they're totally healthy, they're raring to go, he or she might get surprised by those Gs, or maybe they pulled really hard and didn't have time to start squeezing their gut and squeezing those leg muscles, and so therefore their G tolerance is reduced by about 1 to 1.5 Gs, because of the fact that they're not actively working to squeeze that blood back up into their head and upper body. So I wanted to see what you guys thought of this. I think it could be really, really cool. And it could really also factor in some of the modeling of different G-suits, such as, you know, a older aircraft that might not have as advanced of a G-suit for its pilots, may be a better candidate to, or maybe a less good candidate to actually dogfight against, say, a more modern aircraft like an F-16 or an F-18, where the pilot is modeled with having a really good G-suit that really helps them fight the onset of Gs and fight that blackout. I also think that the modeling of the blackout system in DCS could also be improved slightly. Every pilot tends to experience blackout a little bit differently. Some pilots experience it with the actual perfect tunnel vision that you see. Other pilots that I've talked to experience it with their vision literally goes gray. They no longer see colors and then they black out. Some pilots see it from the center out. It really, really changes, and that also varies based on diet, hydration, health of the pilot, all these kinds of things that I think could really come into play and be modeled in a fun and cool way in DCS. So please let me know what you guys think of this idea in the comments section below. It could really add a new element to air combat in DCS World and would affect everything from air-to-ground attack pilots to dogfighting to seed missions to strike missions, BVR combat, everything. And I think it could make DCS World that more realistic because pilots would have to think about how to fight those Gs. And this active reload / timing mechanism, I think, could be a really good way of accomplishing it, or simply having a G tolerance button that you just have to mash down as many times as you can as you're pulling those Gs to make sure that you don't black out. So let me know, like I said, let me know what you guys think in the comments section, and fly safe out there, fellas, and of course, always stay healthy. Things are still a little bit crazy out there with this virus and pandemic thing, so stay healthy out there, guys, and fly safe. See you later.